Welcome to Make Your Money Matter with Brad Barrett, the show that aims to change the way you think about wealth management. Brad is a certified financial advisor, established radio host, and author of Retire Right. He is a managing director and partner at One Capital Management, an SEC-registered investment advisory firm managing over $4 billion for clients across the nation. Brad and his team are dedicated to helping clients protect and preserve their assets so they can reach their investment and retirement goals. And now, your host of Make Your Money Matter, Brad Barrett.
Welcome to Make Your Money Matter. I'm your host, Brad Barrett. I'm also a managing director and partner here at One Capital Management. Today on the show, I want to talk about other areas where you can place your cash other than banks. Obviously, with what's going on in the past few months, which I've spoken about here on the show with Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, we all of a sudden bring up this notion of, hey, I have cash in a bank, and we don't start to think about that these could be IOUs versus just readily cash. So I want to talk about that today, specifically 5 alternatives, 5 of them that you should consider when it comes to your cash other than just putting it in a bank. But before we get started, make sure to go to our website at onecapital.com. There you can click on the media tab. You can download and subscribe to the Make Your Money Matter podcast. You can also download the podcast on any other platform, whether it's Spotify or SoundCloud or the Apple iTunes app or even Google Podcasts. And do me a favor, leave us a review. Give us a comment. It's always good to hear feedback so we can continue to share weekly all the things that we see here in the investment and financial planning world. I would argue for many listening right now, myself included, by the way, very rarely do we stop to think what the balance that's on our bank statement really means, right? To most of us, most of the time, our bank balance means what? It means cash that's readily available for us to withdraw and use. Makes sense, right? But rarely do we actually think of it as a kind of IOU, and that the bank will do its best in conjunction with certain laws and oversight, right, to honor when we wish to redeem it. Mind you, if you had thought about that and you were going to go put $10,000 at a bank account right now and they told you that, you'd be like, that sounds kind of weird. Versus, yeah, it's cash on hand, it's ready to use when you need to. But essentially, this is just eye-opening for someone maybe that's really what it's for. By the way, even more rarely do we consider the chance, obviously, that that bank in particular, my hypothetical there, will not be able to be made good on that IOU. Obviously, with the recent collapses I'm bringing up, again, with obviously Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, right? These all have forced us all, to consider that the balance printed on our bank statements or bank accounts in certain cases can be maybe very different than cash in our wallets. Now, I've shared recently on some podcasts and some shows that we found that is not necessarily the case in some draconian sense. And obviously for balances under $250,000, the FDIC covers that. They've shown themselves. And obviously with what happened a couple months ago, we saw that the Federal Reserve stepped in and basically, in lack of better terminology, nationalized the banks for the next year. So we're protected there, but I still wanted to provide some items here for us to consider, especially given what I've been kind of harping on over the past few weeks around the last 15, 18 months or so with the rise of interest rates. We all think about debt, but we don't think about what's happening in our money market accounts, in our cash equivalent accounts. So I want to talk about those things. And particularly, I want to give you 5 today. And I think more than anything, I want to start off with this. Investors, all of us, should be asking ourselves, where else should I consider putting my cash? And again, I want to go through 5 alternatives to consider. Number 1, FDIC sweep programs. So these FDIC insured sweep programs are offered by many brokerage firms, okay? These programs, they're called sweep. They sweep client cash into FDIC insured bank accounts. So in some cases, clients' deposits are, essentially fanned across multiple banks to provide high levels of FDIC protection. So like bank accounts, yield can vary across programs, but with some programs offering highly competitive yields. And by the way, this is also coupled with the potential for higher levels of FDIC insurance. With brokerage sweep programs, there are an attractive, I think, alternative to consider to a traditional, let's say, savings account. Now, mind you, these 5 I'm going to go through aren't necessarily in prioritized order. They're just 5 I want to list out. So number 1 was FDIC sweep programs. Number 2 is a money market mutual fund. Now, many of you know who are clients, I'm not heavy into the mutual fund world. I believe you can find better active management through ETFs and through your direct portfolio manager. But when it comes to a money market mutual fund, right, it seeks to actually keep its share price at $1. And it basically generates interest income. So money market mutual funds are different from money market accounts in that that are traditionally offered by banks and credit unions because they're investable securities, but they don't carry FDIC insurance. So the funds that are in a money market, that's a money market mutual fund, actually invest in U.S. Treasuries and essentially other high quality fixed income securities. And more than anything, I want people to know that a money market mutual fund is not necessarily cash in a bank like you would normally see a money market accounts. They invest, so they're investable securities. They don't carry FDIC. They're also these money market mutual funds that invest in municipal securities where interest can actually be exempt from federal, state, and local taxes, which is important if you're owning these things in a taxable account. Something I spoke about recently, right, was owning the right investment in the wrong account. Many of you heard me say this before, but it's not always what you own, but how you own it. See, planning comes involved when it comes to investments. Now, I want to share something when it comes to money market mutual funds. While the fund seeks to keep their share price fixed, there's no guarantee here, okay? So again, though exceedingly rare, funds in the past have what's called broken the bank or broken the buck, right? Or they've actually seen the share price drop below $1. We saw this in 2008. So in times of stress, funds can institute gates on withdrawal to help preserve share value. So just some things to know on some of these alternatives. So number 3, I love this one recently because in nearly 2 decades of being an advisor, we haven't seen these, but number 3 is treasuries. Now, these are generally considered one of the safest assets on the planet. These U.S. treasuries are bonds issued directly by the U.S. government. Now, many of you right now might be rolling your eyes because obviously with what we're dealing with the debt ceiling, that could be a question, but hopefully we'll see a vote in Congress here this week for the debt deal done last week, and we can move forward here. So investors, when it comes to securities with treasuries, they should keep in mind that the value of treasuries can fluctuate while they are being basically held to maturity. So understanding the math behind them has a lot to do with, your concept of a treasury. The interest income, which is what I love as well, is also exempt from state and local taxes. So it can be a good tax efficient investment as a cash equivalent in an after-tax account.
Stay connected. Get frequent updates on the show. Follow Brad Barrett and Make Your Money Matter on most social media platforms. And catch full episodes of Make Your Money Matter streaming now on our YouTube channel. To schedule your no-obligation appointment, go to onecapital.com or call 805-410-5454.
Fourth, I'd say is short-term bonds. Short-term bond ETFs, for example, maybe funds, depending on what you're looking at. So investors who are willing to kind of move out of just pure cash in the first 3, as I mentioned, into something a little bit more risk, but still short-term, they can actually deliver increased yield while, in my opinion, as an advisor, remaining relatively safe. So these funds or these ETFs or mutual funds, whatever you might be looking at, they'll invest in fixed income securities that mature in the near future. So there's different types, right? So the short maturities mean that there's limited impact, right, to the fund price when interest rates change, and the yield generated by the fund basically generally tracks changes in interest rates. So one note on this one, investors, for all of us, they can think of these funds as one step further maybe on the risk spectrum compared to maybe a money market mutual fund, for example. So similar to money market funds, there are also municipal versions that can help, again, generate tax-exempt interest. And lastly, I'm going to throw this one in here because I originally wrote this off an article I was reading with 4 in mind, but I wanted to add one more, stocks. Now you might be thinking, whoa. Why would you all of a sudden add stocks to the list of cash equivalents? Obviously, I'm bringing this up for this reason. If you're holding a sizable position in cash, you might be missing out on returns, which is why I'm bringing this up. So when I say sizable, let me break this down. Again, at the onset of today's show, I mentioned that cash equivalents that should be considered alternative really starts after you've achieved, in my opinion, 3 to 6 months of overhead in your savings account. So for example, what I mean by overhead, if your entire lifestyle, costs you 10 grand a month to live, right? You should have somewhere between 30 grand to 60 grand saved up at some point in cash. And then anything beyond that becomes a position for the first 4 I'd bring up when it comes to some cash equivalents and just holding it in cash because you can achieve more yield. Yes, you might be moving out a little bit further on the risk spectrum, but again, we can quantitate that risk depends on where you are with your financial situation. And this when you get to a sizable amount, and that's a subjectable term, right? So whatever that amount might be, let's say you have $60,000 saved up and you get to 100, maybe 200, that environment starts to lend into maybe building a brokerage account for yourself. Maybe, utilizing some broadly diversified stocks, right? to help you grow some value stocks, some growth stocks as an idea to, buffer, if you will, your short-term and longer-term cash positions. Obviously, we know looking back historically, markets have done very well. And so you look at cash equivalents relative to the market, obviously there's a huge delta in outperformance. But as we all know, there's obviously an increase in risk. So this fifth one of stocks obviously is thrown in there when it comes to, again, I want to reiterate this point of sizable cash amounts. Again, that's over your 3 to 6 months of overhead, and then maybe plus a little bit more to a point where you feel comfortable. And this, mind you, of most things, as I mentioned, right, is a great example of where an advisor can come in and help you with this. Obviously, building a plan, understanding what's going into your retirement plan relative to your pension, obviously anything else that's going on in your life, then basically shining that light on other areas or other areas of your finances, if you will, when it comes to cash. And so, bifurcating and splitting out cash into two different camps, one short-term, covering anything less than 2 years of things you may need or situations. And then above that, obviously, is okay, well, I don't want to sit on this too much because I said this last week, actually, is that I've never seen in 2 decades as an advisor someone grow their wealth and ultimately protect their wealth by sitting on the sidelines. So at some point we have to quantify the risk for ourselves, and we need to build that out in what I call bucket plans to make sure we have short-term, mid-term, and long-term areas, and then break that down into what's tax-deferred assets like your retirement plan versus maybe your taxable assets that could likely be your cash. Luckily, as you've noticed today, there are a number of other options for investors to, again, park their cash that I think can deliver compelling yields and in some cases actually higher levels of safety. So I don't want us all sitting back on our laurels after, nearly 15 plus years of, again, artificially low interest rates, basically being comfortable with the fact that we receive less than 1%, and that was a high point at some point, in the last 15 years from the bank. Because of interest rates increases, there are plenty of areas to look at. So if you're out there right now with cash, and I know from many clients I've talked to recently about this, if there's cash out there, let's get some, yield to it. Because money market accounts right now are paying, 4, 4.5, 5% even. And mind you, when I brought up that as an option as money market funds, it's not guaranteed, and it typically follows the securities that it's invested in, which is typically Treasury yields. So it'll fluctuate, but the idea is to keep pace with inflation while we see everything around us being outpaced, and cash has a lot to do with that. I want to thank you for listening to the Make Your Money Matter show. Remember, before acting on anything discussed today, speak with a financial advisor near you about your specific situation. Or again, if you'd like our help, you can reach us at 805-410-5454. And until next week, always remember, make your money matter.
The information in this show is educational and general in nature and does not take into consideration a listener's personal circumstances. Therefore, it is not intended to be a substitute for specific individualized financial, legal, or tax advice. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a final decision.